Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Moviescramble podcast. Today, we are going to be continuing our Hitchcock theme, where we're taking two Hitchcock films with similar themes and basically discussing them. It's a full house today. I am joined by John. John, how are you doing?
Pretty good, yeah. Saturday morning, I'm actually out my bed, which is obviously very nice. And I would say fantastic, but, you know, you always have to have something to aim for, so I'm not going to go that high just yet this early in the day.
Exactly. You don't want to hit the bar when you get up in the morning because you've nothing to reach for the rest of the day.
Exactly.
Mary, how are you doing? You've probably been up since about 6 in the morning, going for runs and things like that.
I wish. No, I actually scheduled this pod for 11 because I know that John likes a long lie and a Saturday. They're sacred for me as well. So
long lies on a Saturday, sacred. Yes, it should be a law. You can't get up for a certain time.
Yeah, and obviously, like, we don't have kids or anything like that, so like we're not disturbed by anyone so proper as a long lie. Like, I would not get out of my bed until 1 or 2 if I didn't have to. I
can't believe you've disowned Baby Yoda so quickly.
Oh, I should have worn my ears today. I've got ears now. You guys look like remotely impressed. I love them. Should have worn them. Damn it. Next time.
For those listening to the podcast, you can't see what me and John see, and what we can see is just Mary not wearing Baby Yoda ears. So if you can imagine that, that's what we can see. But yeah, let's say today we're going to be discussing two Hitchcock films. I think this was Mary's idea to do the Hitchcock box set, based on the fact that we all have the same Hitchcock box set. Oh, sorry, it was John's idea. The Hitchcock box set. I've had this box set personally for about 13 years. I've only started watching it within the last year, which is ridiculous when you think about it. But it's good because I'm starting to see films that I've never seen, including one we will speak about today. The one we're going to speak about first, though, Psycho, is a movie I have seen many times. So I should just pick it up. We're going to discuss Psycho and Frenzy, two films by Hitchcock filmed over 10 years apart, but both have the theme of a serial killer. Now, if you've been following Twitter recently and social media in general, you'll see serial killers are all the rage. But I'm not going to start naming names and have this podcast sued by defamation. But we all know who I'm talking about with our crazy DMs, don't we?
Yeah, best not to call them by their name, yeah.
Yes.
That's the best joke ever. Oh, that was amazing! So smooth.
Yeah, if you do want to know who we're talking about, you can check some social networks.
Oh man, I can't think of any more jokes because I've not even seen anything, so it'll be films that I haven't seen. Shocker.
The first movie we're going to speak about today is 1960s classic Psycho.
Here we have a quiet little motel, when in fact it has now become known as the scene of the crime.
You have a vacancy?
Oh, we have 12 vacancies.
You know, this is the first place that looks like it's hiding from the world.
I think that we're all in our private traps, clamped in them, and none of us can ever get out.
Now, I'm just going to get this out the way just now. For me, this is Hitchcock's best film. It's one of my personal favourite movies. I just think it's an absolute masterpiece. Before we start discussing the plot in that, are we going to discuss spoilers regarding this film? I only mention it because it's kind of like Empire Strikes Back. It's became such ingrained in pop culture that, yeah, there's people that aren't going to know about it. But if anybody's listening to this podcast interested in Hitchcock, chances are you're going to know the ending of this movie. Do we touch on that, or do we try and skirt around it?
I think we just go for it. It's, like I say, it's so iconic. So many people know about it that it's probably one of the biggest sort of spoilers out there. So, yes, it's not really revealing anything that hasn't been told 1,000 times before.
Excellent. That sounds good to me. So the plot. We start off with Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, and she works for a real estate agent. She's having some money issues. She would like to get married to her fiancé, and she's entrusted to deposit 40 grand into the bank. She gets this money in cash and she decides, you know what, I'm just going to steal this. And she just disappears. She makes a run for it. While on the run, you see her fall afoul of a local, I don't know if it's the sheriff's department, but local law enforcement who is suspicious of the fact that she's been on the kind of, she seems a bit kind of edgy, a bit kind of shady. But she manages to lose him and she's driving for a while, gets tired, pulls off at a local motel. Now, this motel looks a bit abandoned, doesn't seem to be getting much in the way of any kind of business, and is run by a young man called Norman Bates, played by the absolutely incredible Anthony Perkins. Up until this point, the movie runs like a very classic Hitchcock thriller. It then takes an incredibly drastic turn, which we will discuss. As we said, we're going to spoil this movie. But before we get to that, I want to know your thoughts on this movie. John, we'll go with you first since you're next to me on the screen. What's your thoughts on Psycho as a movie overall?
It's pretty close to perfection, as far as I'm concerned. It is probably the best Hitchcock film I've seen, although that's debatable. There are a number of them that are sort of top tier, they're right up there. But yes, this is just a perfect film. It covers so many bases. It goes through so many different genres. You're talking about, like, the start of it, it's almost like a bit like a melodrama, and then you've got a thriller aspect, and then there's a horror, and then you go back to sort of more of a sort of psychological film. So it's paced perfectly. You are built up to a major point in it, and from there it then goes up and down and up and down, and it just keeps the audience totally engaged, which is exactly what you want. And it has the element of surprise, and it breaks certain conventions within filmmaking and storytelling as well that were so unusual at the time. They're more prevalent now, I'd like to say, but they were so unusual at the time that it made this film exactly what it is.
Yeah, definitely. I agree 100%. Mary, what's your thoughts on Psycho?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with John. It's pretty much perfect. I imagine for 1960, this was probably quite shocking, and not just in its kind of salaciousness. I mean, in just the kind of style of cinema that it was. I mean, purposefully chosen to be, shot in black and white. There's a lot of interesting techniques used throughout. Like, you'll see characters almost walking into the camera, and there's intense, eye contact throughout. There's a lot of shadowing. There's a lot of foreshadowing for other Hitchcock movies. And I think it's a film that and certainly this was my experience rewatching this for this pod, I kind of took it for granted, because you kind of, it's like the shrieking violins, the stabbing motion that everybody kind of knows, and it's almost become a sort of caricature of itself. And then I watched it again this time, and I obviously, you guys know I was messaging you on the group chat, and I was so taken in by Anthony Perkins. I had tears in my eyes at some points. It's a flawless performance from him, and it's just, yeah, I mean, it's not my favourite Hitchcock, but it's like up there as one of the greatest films of all time. It really is. It's perfect.
Definitely. And let's just cut to the chase here in terms of the twists. This is a movie that has two major twists. One comes at the midway point, and that's when our would-be lead actress, the star of the movie, seemingly, is brutally murdered in a shower scene. And we are led to believe at this point she is murdered by Norman's jealous and vengeful mother. Now, when we first meet Norman, he seems like a very shy and fidgety kind of person, but when he speaks about his mother, who he lives with, it gets quite intense. And we hear him having arguments with her up in the house, and his mother isn't happy with the fact that this woman could be there to corrupt her Norman and lead him away with temptation and stuff. So she takes it upon herself to remove that threat. And the scene is incredibly violent without being gratuitous. It's not gory, really, in any way, but it is shocking. And as you said, Mary, for the 60s especially, it would have been shocking, and so massively cut as well for a shower scene. There's not really any nudity, so to speak, in terms of how the censors would define nudity, like a nipple, for example. It's very interestingly shot and cut, and even the knife, you don't really see it penetrate the skin, but it doesn't make it any less brutal. And it's for a very iconic scene as well in cinema, it's over very quickly, and then it's just done. and that
Yeah.
score, just that iconic score, just stops. And you've got that tracking shot that takes you out of the motel, up into the house, and you hear Norman scream at his mother, "What have you done?"
Yeah. I think for me as well, it's the bit where she grabs the shower curtain and the hooks just come off one by one, and it's almost like plucking a string, like a violin, and then her face hits the floor, and you just see, like, you know, her mouth sort of slightly distorted because of the way it's hit the tile, and, you know, her eyes are wide open, and it's just, that to me is more horrific than like any of the stuff. I don't know why, but that always really gets me. It's just the fact that she's so, like, she's just been discarded the way she's left. And it's undignified as well, because obviously, and although it's not like a sexualized thing because you don't really see much of her body, but, you know, it's that whole idea of she's just left there and she's kind of on display and anyone could walk in, and it feels that kind of grubby way. But yeah, it's one of the most iconic scenes in cinema, and rightfully so. But it must have been, again, really quite short. Janet Leigh, massive star, you know, was really, really hitting her peak. And what, an hour into this movie, she's bumped off. Like, it must have been like, cinema goers must have been like, what? It must have been really unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's a fact as well, it's not only does it kill the biggest star in the movie, you're watching this movie, like, cold, and you think to yourself, yeah, she stole some money for the employer. It's going to be a kind of chase thing, typical Hitchcock type idea, you know, crime thriller, chase across America type idea. Oh, wait, where is this going?
Yep, especially when he does the cleanup afterwards and he doesn't discover the money. So you realise, wait a minute, it's not about the money at all. This isn't, you know, the money goes into the boot of the car and gets disposed of with the body. So you're kind of going, wait, so what are we talking here? What type of person is this guy, you know?
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, just you mentioned that scene there as well with tidying up. That's such a painstakingly meticulous scene. It's so unnerving because you're right. You're like, what kind of guy is this? This isn't somebody that's doing this for the first time, but it's also somebody that's clearly shocked by the murder. He's visibly distraught and upset, but he wants to protect his mother, as we're led to believe at this stage.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, there's such a calm over it. Like, although he does appear like quite frantic and he's like gasping and he's kind of shaking as he's sort of dragging her out of the tub or whatever, there is a sort of a kind of practical, right, okay, well, I'm going to get you wrapped up, and it does make you go, okay, this is a guy that's very, very used to taking after or looking after his mother, as you say, and it sort of calls back that intensity of the prior scene where, you know, Marion's making suggestions about, you know, you could go out in the world and you could be anything and you could meet a girl, and that kind of, you know, steeliness comes over his eyes that isn't quite there up until that point. And it does make you wonder, right, okay, what kind of relationship does this guy have with his mother, and is she controlling him? You know what? Because we're in the same position as Marion. We hear the insults coming from the house and him screaming in shock at what his mother's done, and you just assume, obviously if it's your first time viewing, if you've seen it more than once, not, you just assume that it's mother that's doing all the dictating as to what goes on in that motel.
Yeah, you see the scene in the shower itself. Everybody remembers shower curtain being pulled back and the face is in darkness, you can't see, and the knife's there, and it's the score. But for me, the scariest bit of that scene is before you see the door opening through the shower curtain. There's no music. It's just it's framed, and you're watching it, and although you've got Janet Leigh in the shower, your eyes are drawn to this dead bit of screen. You're going, right, that's framed like that for a reason. What's going to happen there? And you just see the door open and the figure walking towards, and I think that is terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying. And this is a film that probably terrified people going to shower, for God's sake.
I was going to say, either terrified going in the shower or sales of shower curtains must have plummeted after this.
Well, it's all feeding on Cold War paranoia and things like that as well. It was basically saying you're safe nowhere. You know, you kind of think, like, if you think about it, when people get upset, they run to the bathroom and have a good cry or whatever. So even the bathroom is out of bounds now. You just can't protect yourself there. There's nothing safe. You know, they can get you always. It's not. I mean, obviously it was done again with Jaws in the 70s. It wasn't safe to go in the water, you know, but this is even worse. You're in an enclosed space anyway, and it just kind of heightens the fact that anything can happen to you, and it's not a pleasant feeling at all.
No, I was going to say, it's just interesting because at the start of this movie, you're like, she's automatic, well, not maybe painted as a villain as such, but she's clearly, you know, her relationship is with a man who's still married. They're sneaking around the motel. She's stolen money. She's on the run. So she's not necessarily like portrayed necessarily as virtuous, and she seems more in command when she's having the conversation with Norman as well. She's a sort of woman of the world and more wise. And obviously she's been smart enough to like swap her car around and, you know, give a fake name and all this. So she's not necessarily portrayed as this innocent victim. But the minute she gets in that shower, she's, you know, obviously quite literally naked, but defenseless as well. And as you see, as soon as that door opens, you're just like, you know, and you don't, the thing is, at the time, I imagine maybe people wondered, oh, is it somebody coming after the money? Or is it, you know, because you've already seen Norman sort of looking through the little peephole, is it Norman coming in to watch her in the shower? There was actually sort of no certainties as to who was walking through that door as well. And because the setup had been that she was a bad woman, it could have been any number of things.
Yeah, and the whole thing, you can mention money there as well, is that it's a plot device just to get the character to that motel. There is, it's not actually part of the story.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not the main part of the story. It's not what the story is about. It's a very good misdirection in a sense as well. And I think, I don't know if Hitchcock coined the term, but they call it a MacGuffin.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, they do the same Indiana Jones as well. But yeah, I mean, it's like, you actually forget about the money after the murder.
Yeah, I think up until that point, it's still in your head because she had written a little note and she'd worked out how much she'd spent and stuff like that. So I think it's still in your head up until that point, and then it's almost like, as you say, it becomes like a totally different movie almost, and the money's totally irrelevant.
Yep. Yeah. A couple of stats for that particular scene. It took 7 days to shoot it. It's 90 seconds long. It had 78 different setups and 52 cuts within those 90 seconds. And they brought in Saul Bass, the titles guy, to aid on it as well, so that it would have this sort of really sort of stylish look to it. And the reason it got through the censors and everything, like you say, was because everything is left to your imagination. There is nothing there. You imagine more than there actually is on screen. And it's a device that has been used successfully since then, if you think about it. Like, so if Tarantino has used it to great effect with the ear cutting scene. If you talk to people about that, they say, oh, it was horrible seeing him gets his ear cut off and all that, and you say, but you didn't see anything. It's exactly the same here. You don't see, in fact, you don't see any blood in that scene until the very end of it. You don't see blood going down the drain. You don't see blood on the shower curtain. It's only afterwards, when she's actually lying in the tiled floor, do you see just a wee bit of blood. And that's amazing. That's absolutely incredible.
It's another reason why it was shot in black and white as well, because the censors were all over it. And of course, if you shoot in black and white, maybe the blood's not as obvious. But yeah, I mean, they had a lot of problems with the various, not just that scene. That was obviously the biggest issue they had in terms of censorship, but just the whole thematics of it and the idea of, I don't know if I'm allowed to, we are doing spoilers yet, and the idea of a man dressing up as a woman as well, and how he was going to be sort of categorised. And, you know, the sort of psychoanalyst scene at the end was totally shoehorned in, and Hitchcock hated it, but they just did it because they felt like it would clear things up. And just, he had so many problems with this that he actually just became kind of like, not disgusted with it, but there, you know, are rumours that he just kind of walked off set and told people to piss off, and he was going to do things his own way. And he became quite angry about shooting it because there were so many people telling him what he could and couldn't do. And he just wanted to make this really good, scary movie as he saw it.
Yeah, and this is a movie that wasn't very well received by critics when it came out.
No.
Which is, I mean, I know we've discussed this with many films in the past, like The Shining, for example, how people look at it now as one of the most important movies ever made. But at the time, that was not the general consensus, and that's why sometimes you don't want to be too harsh on a film that comes out now, because you don't know how it's going to be looked upon in 20 years' time. You just don't know. But the idea that the thing with Psycho, as was interesting, was it was a box office smash. It wasn't like The Shining, for example, where it failed at the box office and critics were a bit kind of not sure either. And now they're retrospectively look upon it as one of the greatest movies ever. Audiences love Psycho. And you still see stuff like that to this day, where critics can get a bit snobbish with a film saying, I mean, yeah, it done well at the box office, but it's shite. So, well, clearly, even if it is a shite popcorn munching film, whatever you want to say about it, millions of people are going to see it. They must be doing something right. And with something like Psycho, it just did prove that the audiences were correct and that this was a movie that was going to endure. And regarding the kind of the mid-movie twists and stuff, Hitchcock had a no late admission policy. He insisted on it in the theatre. He didn't want people to turn up late for it, and it makes sense. I think that should be imposed anyway in most films, but definitely with this, I mean, I don't get me wrong, if you're turning up an hour into a film, I don't know why you'd bother. Yeah. But this is a movie you don't want to miss anything.
Yeah. I think it became a sort of word of mouth hit as well. And I always remember, just as an aside, my dad telling me when he went to see The Exorcist, there was priests standing outside saying, don't go in and see this film, like it's going to be bad for your soul. And to this day, he's like, I don't know if that was a marketing tool or whatever, but it just made people want to go and see the movie. He was like, I don't know if they were real priests, but the bottom line, what people were saying, you have to go and see this movie from the start, is that kind of whole word of mouth, like, oh, it must be really exciting. And, Hitchcock was doing movie marketing way before that was even a thing.
And the thing is, John, you kind of mentioned about the idea, like the man dressing up in the... Oh, sorry, who said it was made John there? About the man dressing up in women's clothes type idea, and like being a murderer and stuff, and it could be controversial. And I think that's even been re-looked at these days. But Norman Bates is not a transsexual. He's not a transvestite. He's not someone dressed up in women's clothes for any other reason, and he genuinely believes he is his mother. And that's an incredible, powerful twist. And we kind of skip to the end of the movie here, where we have Marion's lover and sister who try and track her down, and they get to the motel and they think Norman's the killer, but so do we. We don't think Norman's the killer at this point, we think his mother is. And you get the infamous scene where Vera Miles goes out the basement and you think it's Mrs. Bates sitting on the chair, and the chair turns round and it's a corpse. And at that point you're like, whoa, what? Because I watched Psycho 2 before watching Psycho, so I already knew the ending. I never watched this film called...
Wow, what admission to make.
I seen Psycho 2 and I was like, way too young to be watching it. I don't even know what you would think at that point. I don't think your mind would automatically go, well, Norman's clearly the killer, dressing up his mum's clothes. I don't think you would. It's just too much of a leap. And then she hits the light bulb, she turns around, and Norman's standing in the doorway. And that's when you're like, I don't know how your mind would comprehend that. You try to join the dots, and I think I don't mind the fact that they put that scene in with the psychoanalyst explaining stuff. I think it makes sense to do so because
I'm going to disagree. I think
there's a lot of interpretation.
I think it's too long and it's too wordy, and I think that it's one of those things where I remember the first time I saw it. I mean, I totally shit myself every time that chair spins round, but I just kind of assumed, because the first time I watched it, I remember, like, obviously Norman says, like, she had a boyfriend. And it was a shame because, he died and then his mum died. And I remember the more this went on and his sheaf got flipped around in the chain, I was like, Norman's bumped her off. And then you see him, I didn't make the leap to, and then he's dressing up as her. Like, I just kind of thought, right, well, he's obviously bumped her off. But I think they tried to make it out as a sort of like kind of psychosexual thing, like he was getting kicks out of dressing up as a woman in order to commit the murders, but that definitely isn't the case. As you say, it's, he firmly believes that he is, when he's in those clothes, he is his mother and he has conversations as his mother. So I don't think there's anything untoward, but I always feel like that scene at the end is just, explain it to me like I'm a viewer. Like, I think it's one of those films where you can kind of draw your own conclusions from it and you don't need that kind of shoehorned in.
I suppose I need to see it without that scene and see what they put in its place, because I don't know how the movie would have been otherwise. Like, for me, one of the most terrifying scenes in that entire film is the last scene when he's sitting, when it's Mrs. Bates is taking over, and Norman's in the cell with a blanket over him, and he kind of shivers, and it just kind of it looks like a wee old lady. The way his posture is and he stands, and it's like, I wouldn't even hurt a fly. It looks straight at the camera, and I'm like, oh, that's in the movie. Yeah, that's horrific.
Yeah.
I don't know how that scene would have played out without anything in between to try and join the dots. It's all very well leaving it in interpretation stuff. I just don't know how it would have worked without something to at least say, right, here's what we think's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I just don't think it needs to be maybe as wordy. One thing I did notice this time, which I haven't noticed before, is when Marion is driving away from the office and she's stolen the money, and how she's imagining the conversations about what they're going to say when so she's looking, but she's looking at the road, obviously, but she is looking into the camera. There's a slight smirk goes across her face, and it's the first time I've ever gone, that's the exact same as the end scene. And it just that beautiful bit of mirroring where I was just like, oh my God, and she's hearing the voices and the little smirk comes across her face. And I've never actually noticed that before. And I was like, this is the best film ever. This is so good.
So what did you think about the changes in the way that it was kind of shot between the two sort of halves? Like, to begin with, it was all reasonably, I know, like I said, it was in black and white, but it was kind of bright when they were in the hotel room together, the couple. It was all bright and she was wearing white and everything like that, and it was all quite nice, you know, it was ordinary. But then when she ends up at the motel, she's speaking to Norman, and then she says, oh, I'm really tired, I'm going to go, you know, go to my bed, have a shower, whatever. As soon as he goes back into the office, it's darker. There are more shadows. It's lit from below. So you're seeing all the shadows coming up, and you're seeing the shadows of him, and you're seeing the shadows of like the owls and the crows and things like that, and they're all being projected against the wall. It just makes it so much more sinister right away, and you don't really, you get a kind of a vibe from Norman to begin with that says he's a bit shy, he's a bit awkward, especially around single women. But then after that, it just kind of changes. It becomes more sort of upright and more purposeful and everything as well. And that's even before he's started having to clean up after his mother. It just seems to be when he's alone, he's more of himself.
Yeah, I get that. And I might notice that when he's speaking to Sam, when he's speaking to Marion's lover, he has a lot more assurance about him. It's almost like he's trying to play the alpha male, albeit badly. He speaks very differently to the male characters in the movie as the female characters. He's not intimidated by the males. He's intimidated by the women. And maybe that's because he knows, well, there's lots of different reasons for it. He's socially awkward, but there's also, he knows if he gets too close to them, they're going to die. But with the guy, he's like, with Sam, he's trying to act like the hard man. He's trying to act tough, and he's just acting guilty as fuck, basically, but in a different way, not in a kind of guilty as in like nervous way, the way Marion was earlier, and a very assuredness about him, which you don't see at any other point in the film, and I find it really interesting.
Yeah, I think, like, see what John said about the shadows lighting up. What's interesting is the scene between him and Marion previous to that. You know, they're both sitting down, they're both on the, like, there's a kind of sense of equality between them because they're both facing each other and sitting down. She goes off to her room and he goes back into that little kind of parlour or office bit, and as you see, it's all lit from below and the shadows cast up the wall, and all of a sudden it makes him look more sort of like ghoul-like, you know, because of the lighting, and it obviously hits off like cheekbones and stuff. And at that point, although it's just like a kind of subtle change in the lighting, then he just goes and moves the picture out of the way, and you see he's got the hole cut in it, and you're like, whoa, this guy, you know, he's playing a blinder, because 10 minutes ago he was fumbling, you know, he couldn't get his words out properly. He looked like he was, you know, had tears in his eyes when he was talking about being stuck there forever. And all of a sudden, just that lighting change, you get a totally different side of him as a character as well. And yeah, it's so cleverly done. It's brilliant.
And that kind of mirror, that scene there who you're talking about, that mirrors the end of the shower scene as well, because when he's watching her, it's a close-up of his eye that you get, and he doesn't really blink at all. He's obviously just taking everything in, and then, as you say, at the end of the shower scene, you see Marion lying on the floor, unblinking for obvious reasons, that she's not breathing either, you know? So yeah, it works particularly well that way, I thought.
And also the thing with the birds as well is the birds was actually Hitchcock's next movie. But what I love about that scene where you notice them all on the wall is he talks about being stuck in a trap, and it kind of mirrors, I don't, if you remember the speech at the start of The Birds where, you know, you're in your gilded cage, Melanie Daniels, and it's talking about being stuck in this particular life. And that's what I mean about there's so much foreshadowing for later films, and even the trick of looking straight into the camera. I mean, that's lifted straight out of Shadow of a Doubt, which obviously was a previous movie. But what I love about Hitchcock's movies is if you watch them all together, you're like, I mean, he's very much the auteur. He had so many different themes and little tricks and little looks to camera that you're like, this is just perfect, and I can just tell it's one of your movies, and this is why I love them so much.
Regarding the foreshadowing as well, he seems to like talking about taxidermy quite a lot, and we find out why he's so good at it.
Yeah.
Listen, I really like, I'm torn, because every time, as I say, when I watch this movie again this time, I was totally captured by Perkins. You know, his hands are shaking and he's talking about, you know, he's not had much of a life, and there are kind of tears in his eyes and he just seems so pathetic. And part of me is like, is this a kind of nature versus nurture thing? Was his mother, when she was alive, so domineering that she's turned him into the person that he is? Or has he just always been a psychopath? And I genuinely am torn, because he does seem like, obviously he's pretending to be his mother and himself, but that change in personality, he does seem to be genuinely two different people. So I'm kind of intrigued by, like, and I watched that Bates Motel, the series, and it didn't give me the answers I was looking for. So
you're probably best watching the sequels then to Psycho. And I know we always kind of laugh at horror movies and that, but John, have you seen any of the sequels?
I've not seen any of the sequels at all, no.
See the second one. I've not watched the second one in a while, but I remember it being a very good film. It's set about 20 years after the first one, and it's Norman's been let out in a mental institution.
I was going to say, how is he back in society?
Yeah.
But okay, they let him out.
He has nowhere else to go but back to the old house. And people are suspicious. Is he really like sane? Is he really like reformed and stuff, like rehabilitated? So he goes back to the house and everything seems okay. But then the killings start back up, and Norman isn't sure if it's him. He doesn't know if he's doing it or not.
What?
And it's basically him struggling with his own sanity. And I'd like to watch it again, because I really enjoyed it when I watched it. I thought it was a great movie. Very interested. It's good to see Anthony Perkins in the role again. A bit older, obviously, but he's still brilliant in it. He's still very good. The third one is more of a kind of like 80s slasher type idea, and it's fun, but it's not anything that the first movie was really kind of like. And then the fourth one's a prequel, so
Sorry,
it's Norman. It's Norman. It's actually it's Norman speaking to a radio psychologist, and he starts talking about his past. So you go back to him as a boy, and it will give you the answers whether you like them or not, regarding how he is.
Okay, I mean that's piqued my interest slightly.
But I would watch Psycho 2. I would recommend it.
I mean, you would recommend like Psycho 14. Like, let's be honest. Let's be honest.
I'm not recommending the remake. Let's not go nuts.
Oh no, let's not go that far. Speaking of horror sequels, again, one thing I noticed this time is, see the scene where Arbogast, the detective, is in the Bates house and he's walking up the stairs, and you just see him obviously climbing the stairs, and there's silence, and then all of a sudden Mother just fucking shoots out from the right and the violin starts. Is that not the exact same as the scene in, is it Exorcist 3 with the nurse? It's literally just like somebody appears out of nowhere and you're just not expecting it, and all of a sudden there's another murder. Yeah,
it's been used as a kind of a standard horror trope, I would say, especially in the 80s horror films, but yeah, not so much around about then. It was fairly unique, I would say. Wasn't
that really makes me jump, because I can never get, it's like when the body breathes in 7, I can never quite get the timing right as to when it's going to come, and it always makes me sort of jump when it happens.
Yeah, or the body in the boat in Jaws.
Yeah,
where he's scuba diving and it just appears in the whole, and you know it's coming. And I remember I've seen Jaws in cinema a couple of times as well. See this collective jump, and I remember every time I went and seen Jaws in cinema for the last time a couple of years ago, and it was somebody next to me that I hadn't seen the movie before.
What?
And it got to that scene, and it was great. It was great to experience.
Did you see their soul exit their body as they left?
Yeah, welcome everybody to the Moviescramble spoiler podcast, where we spoil films from all generations.
So that's been The Simpsons with Mayor Quimby, and the chick in the crying game was really a man.
It was a sledge. Oh man,
I remember I got Gosford Park on DVD once. Was it Gosford Park? Yeah. And I said to my dad, I'm going to stick this on. And he went, oh, is that the one where so-and-so is the murderer in this? And I was like, Dad, I've not seen this. And he was like, oh, sorry. Oh, you'll enjoy it anyway. Yeah. Great.
My dad used to have a great obsession, habit, I don't know what you want to call it. He would like to show me the end of movies.
Why?
I don't know why. I always remember the two movies he would always show me the end of was Breathless with Richard Gere and The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins. And and I'm sitting, I've still not seen these films all the way through from start to finish. I don't have to. And we're sitting there like, Long Good Friday, blah, blah, and he puts it on and shows me the ending. And he explained to me what happened, because I obviously didn't know the plot. And I'm like, oh, that's bad. That's quite a good twist there. Yeah. I wouldn't have seen that coming.
Like The Sound of Music. Surprise, they escape. We might as well just go for all of the big reveals.
I think that's the sound that I'm not expecting the Sound of Music to have some kind of dark ending, to be fair.
Oh, it'd be amazing if it did, wouldn't it?
I mean, maybe that's how my dad showed me Psycho 2 first. He went, I could show you the twists in Psycho, but it take too long, so I'm just going to show you Psycho 2, which recaps the first movie in the first 5 minutes.
And also lets you know that Norman's still kicking about.
Yep. And after that, what did they show you the crying game after that? Yeah, just say he's got a bobby.
No context spoilers. Just
You know, the worst thing is though is the fact that I've seen so many other movies that have ruined other classic twists. Like Ace Ventura ruined the crying game. Scary Movie ruined The Usual Suspects.
yeah. I remember you saying this because did you not watch Scary Movie before you watched The Usual Suspects, so you knew what had happened?
But it was because someone said to me, "That's the same ending as Usual Suspects." I'm like, "Oh, what do they mean?" And I'm watching it like, "Oh, I get what they mean. That makes sense." You know, it's like watching Usual Suspects for the first time, and the cops interrogating Kevin Spacey and saying, "You're the killer. You're Kyle Associate." He's going, "It's Gabriel Bunz. It's Gabriel Bunz the killer. Gabriel Bunz Kyle Associate." Blah blah. He's going, "No, it's not true. It's not true." I'm going, "No, it's not fucking true, is it?" But anyway, I think it's safe to say that Psycho is a recommend from me. This just seems kind of pointless to do. We're going to do it because tradition. John?
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. Yep, classic.
Eddie?
Yep, I mean it's flawless. It's one of the best examples of a good horror movie that yes has jump scares, but they're used sparingly and they're used well.
If you get a chance to watch Psycho 2, it pops up on Netflix from time to time.
Okay, I mean, do you know what? I used to think, again, oh Christ, you should probably psychoanalyze this. I used to think Anthony Perkins was really handsome as Norman Bates, so read into that what you will. So if it's on, I would watch it just to see what he looked like, yeah.
Yeah, he's a good looking guy in Psycho, you know, it's like, it's not getting away from that. But yeah, I didn't realise.
I just like to admit to these things just in case, like, I'm put on some sort of list somewhere because I usually find that I'm only attracted to someone like once they start playing like a serial killer or a psychopath. So yeah,
Mary, you're already on these lists. You're already on these lists.
Yeah, you're delusional if you think you're not. And once you get your vaccine, Bill Gates will know about it as well. So you'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, Google already know about it. So.
Oh no! I just if I'm looking for something like, for example, as I say, I only noticed how good looking Tahar Rahim was in The Serpent, where he's obviously playing a disgusting serial killer. So I just go incognito for all my little searches.
So this podcast, I was going to say, is taking a dark turn, but if we keep in any of the original chat at the beginning before we started, we just kind of went on basically, continued as we started.
Yeah.
So that was Psycho, and if you haven't seen Psycho, apologies. We've just ruined it for you.
I know, it's probably ruined it for you, yeah.
But if you have seen Psycho, just watch it again anyway, because it's a fantastic movie, absolute classic, as both John and Mary said, as close to, if not perfection, as you're going to get from a film. Just absolutely stunning. Next up is the 1972 British thriller Frenzy.
I dare say you are wondering why I am floating around London like I am on the famous Thames River, investigating a murder. Rivers can be very sinister places, and in my new film Frenzy, this river, you may say, was the scene of a very horrible murder.
I must admit that if it wasn't for this podcast, if it wasn't for that box set, I wouldn't have heard of this movie. I wouldn't have known of it. To me, it's one of Hitchcock's lesser-known films. I don't think it is. I think it is fairly known. A lot of critics saw it as a return to form after movies like Topaz and Tom Curtain, which I thought was about half, because I thought Tom Curtain was really good. But this also deals with a serial killer theme, albeit in a very different way from Psycho, as this movie starts off with a murder and explains how the cops are investigating a serial killer known as the tie killer?
The necktie strangler.
The necktie strangler, that's what it was, sorry. Yeah, necktie strangler.
Look at me all buzzing for this.
We have John Finch, who plays Richard Blaney, unemployed barman, former RAF squaddy, who's just basically kind of kicks about in his life, doesn't he? He just basically tries to kind of earn a buck here and there, and he unfortunately gets fingered as being the necktie strangler. And yeah, you're laughing at that wee fingered comment there, but there's also a scene in this film when she mentions that at the bar.
Oh
What?
yeah, you're always. I thought you were going to say the you're spilling your load scene, but that's something
No.
else. Okay.
This does have more kind of Hitchcock themes to it. When the idea it's like the innocent man being accused, even though the evidence against him is pretty overwhelming. This is film I don't want to say too much about because I don't know a lot about this movie. So if you want to spoil it, that's fine. And I say spoil, I use the term loosely because it might not be a spoiler. It could be part of the synopsis. I'm not as familiar with it in that idea. I was watching this film completely fresh, completely cold. I had no idea what it was about. I had no idea who the killer was until I was watching it, that type of thing. But I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. It was Hitchcock's penultimate movie, but also seen as it was also his final British film. And when you watch Psycho, for example, and then you go to this, it's a very different film in terms of it's still Hitchcock. It's still got Hitchcock tropes in that, but stylistically, because it's set in London, the actors, even just the accents, as stupid as that sounds, there's something quite, I feel a bit cheesy about it. The accents are either very fresh in your drink, governor, or how you doing, sir? There's very different.
Sorry, whereabouts in London is that?
Yeah.
Hitchcock's London. It feels like there's two very specific classes in this film.
Yeah, you've got your Barbara Lee Hunt, who's got the clipped, English accent, which is very polite and everything's, she says you have peculiar interests and that really her mouth barely moves, it's so tight. And then you have obviously Bob Rusk, who's 5 bob for some apples, governor sort of thing. Yeah.
And Richard Blaney seems to kind of straddle these two worlds.
Yeah.
Being a very educated man that's clearly had a good upbringing, but now kind of dosses about and try to sell money. But what did you think of this movie? If you just watch, I take it this isn't your first time watching it. Now, John, you've seen it before, yeah?
Nope, never seen it before.
Oh,
this was my first introduction to it. It's a very, like you say, it's a very different Hitchcock film, and that's got a lot to do with the way that cinema had changed in the late 60s, I think, more than anything else. There was obviously the sort of new American cinema movement, which produced the likes of Bonnie and Clyde and all these sort of films that sort of followed on from it. They were kind of classed as sort of new auteurs, really, weren't they? You're talking about talking about Francis Ford Coppola and all these sort of guys. They changed the way that films were made and the way that films actually looked. And Hitchcock obviously never one to sort of stand still. Pretty much did the same. He changed how the film looked. He went back to his roots in a way, and the fact that it was all seedy London streets and things like that. There wasn't much polish or varnish on this film when you look back in these sort of 50s and early 60s films, even up to the likes of Torn Curtain, which was all kind of glossy and, they're on a boat and, the Norwegian fjords and all this sort of stuff. It's nothing like that at all. It's kind of more seedy and everything. So in terms of that, it was a bit of a departure. Yes, there were a number of accents in here as well. Obviously not as many as Thomas of a Thousand Voices, but there was a few. I didn't know whether I was going to like this based on the first sort of 10-15 minutes, because it was an awful lot of professional cockneys that were there as well, but it did really, really engage me after the sort of the initial sort of take on it, which I was surprised at. I really thought it was going to be a bit of a dodgy film, especially when I saw John Finch's corduroy shoes. I was kind of going, how do you get away with wearing corduroy shoes at any time? It's just never a fashion item, I'm sorry. But yes, I thoroughly enjoyed the film. It was almost like the polar opposite to Psycho in terms of the way it depicted violence.
Yeah.
You saw everything. You did, it went from use your imagination to, well, hey, here's another shot of a breast, that kind of thing. So there was that, but that was again down to the times as well. You're talking more sort of Sam Peckinpah kind of style of violence there, rather than using just what your own mind can conjure up. But yes, I did enjoy the film. I really did. Mary.
Before we go- Sorry, before
Sorry,
we go, Mary, that's what I can mention. Is I was the same, John, the first 10 minutes of this movie. I wasn't sure. I felt like I was watching an episode of The Sweeney.
Yeah, aye. Yeah. An early version of EastEnders or something like that.
Yeah.
So we was waiting
Mark-
for Danny Dyer to rock up.
I was expecting Arthur Daly to turn up at one point. I mean, Mary, you had seen this film before, so...
Yeah, I think this is maybe my 6th time of watching this. It was actually, my dad is a bit of a Hitchcock aficionado, and he was like, I think you'd really like this. It's probably not a compliment when you know what the film is like. He was like, but, this was Hitchcock's sort of, love letter to like the fruit stalls of London that he grew up in. And, it was the first movie I think he'd shot there since maybe The Man Who Knew Too Much. And it was just this kind of, it's almost like a goodbye to London. And he was like, I think you really like it. And then I watched it and I was horrified, because you're right, it's everything that Psycho isn't. And I think that's kind of why I like it so much, because from the outset, the tone is set where you've got, again, this naked body floating down this like disgusting, like shit coloured water. Like it's like grey brown and just floating down. And then you've got the barmaid who a couple of seconds later, where, her eyes are all dancing and she's like, oh, I heard he rapes them first. And it's all very like, it almost feels like, not a Carry On movie because that's too ridiculous, but it almost feels like a sort of send up of a horror film because it's so ostentatious and it's like goriness or whatever, grubbiness, whatever you want to call it. And then it becomes this kind of, it's not, I'm going to disagree with you, so it's not really a typical Hitchcock in terms of the wrong man, because Blaney is set up as this kind of like, he's a bum, he can't keep a job, he's, he has this girlfriend, he's maybe taking money out of the till at the bar and he's helping himself to drink, he's divorced, and he clearly has a really bad temper. Whereas, on the flip side, you've got Bob Rusk, who's this congenial sort of uncle type figure who, I'll give you 20 quid and I'll give you a tip in the races and have a bag of fruit. And it's all this kind of like, so he is set up as a very, very believable suspect, whereas Rusk isn't. And I kind of love the fact that it's the necktie strangler, because like, if you think of a necktie, that's somebody who's maybe a gentleman and a wee bit more refined. And of course, it's the very thing that makes him not so. But I love this movie. I love the way the silence is used throughout it. I love the tension and the sort of big scene between Bob Rusk and Brenda. And I think it's like, if Hitchcock had free rein throughout his career, and if he'd lasted a bit longer, I think he would have done more like this. I think it would have become more and more salacious, because I think he liked to sort of titivate people and actually make them think about maybe what their own kinks and preferences and dirty little secrets were. And I think if he'd gone on longer, he'd have done more like this. But I love this film so much. To me, it's right up there as one of Hitchcock's best.
I do agree with what you're saying there. I think this is like Hitchcock doing what he's always wanted to do in a way, because he can get away with it. Mm-hmm. It's like the senses of it were kind of relaxed now, so it's different kind of...
Oh yeah, they'd had the Carry On films by then, so like,
yeah,
boobs and stuff like that were all, everything was fine.
He's like, I can show nipples, excellent, get them out hen.
Yeah.
That's what it was kind of like. But yeah, that scene in the bar made me kind of like raise my eyebrows a bit when we were talking about the rape. Was it say something about if you're lucky or something? Uh-huh. And it's like, whoa, I don't know. I don't imagine that being okay at the time, let alone now. But he said the way she kind of goes, oh, what you like? And I'm like, wow, man, this pub seems crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're right. Like, the thing about Richard Blaney as well is a very believable killer. It's mm-hmm. possible, that's what I'm saying, the overwhelming evidence against it, even if it's circumstantial or not. But unlike Psycho, where it has this big reveal twist, the big reveal in this movie, if you want to call it that, happens really early on. There's not some big that twist in this movie. You find out who the killer is really early, and you know he's not the killer. So it doesn't matter how violent he is, how believable he is. You know as a viewer, he's innocent. But you keep thinking to yourself, how's he going to prove this because he looks so guilty?
Yeah, I just meant the setup between the two characters is quite... Yeah. Like, although the reveal does come very early, the setup is very clearly designed to sort of throw you off the scent, as it were. Apparently, Michael Caine was offered the part of Bob Rusk and turned it down because he said the movie was disgusting. But can you imagine what that movie would have been like if it had been Michael Caine?
Oh, I'd love it. The offense to Mr. Rusk, God rest his soul, but I mean, Michael Caine, you should do more films.
He was probably doing Jaws 3 at the time, busy.
I think you'll find it was Jaws 4, and that didn't come until about 15 years later.
So, I think what's interesting for me is like that whole extended sort of scene between Brenda and Bob, I think is really, like, I don't even know if you get away with putting that in a film now. Like, it's really, really graphic. As first-time viewers, like, I mean, not that it doesn't shock me every time, but as first-time viewers watching it, how did that play out for you guys?
For me, I wasn't sure if it was just how it was shot or I was trying to get some interpretation that he was some kind of impotent rapist, because there was something very strange about it in the sense that it just seemed very pathetic as much as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And almost like not pitying from a viewer point of view, but self-pitying of himself. And I wasn't too sure if that was a deliberate style or it was just how it looks now. But I thought it was a very graphic scene. You do see enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it is quite a horrible scene. But it's it goes on quite long as well. I mean, compared to the Psycho shower scene, for example, which you say, John, is 90 seconds, this seems to go on a long time. And yeah, as a rape scene, of course it's supposed to be horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't expecting to see it in a film, especially made in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was very voyeuristic, I thought. The whole scene, the way that it was shot, the way that there was a close-up on the victim an awful lot. It didn't really pull away, like you say. It kind of overstayed its welcome in that respect, and I can see the impotence angle of it as well, the way that the rage that he felt when he was doing this. I thought it was quite interesting. Even before then, his mother got introduced into the film. Did he not get introduced to
she was introduced to Blaney?
Yes, aye. So that was a nice wee comparison between the two films as well. The fact that there was sort of, he obviously had mother issues as well at the same time, except she seemed quite nice, but you don't know that.
And she was alive, so there was that.
Frenzy 2 could be, we could cover that whole thing. But yes, it was long and it was very, very graphic. And I know you're not supposed to say you like it because it can paint a picture of you. But yeah, it was shocking, and I think that's exactly what it was going for. And the times kind of allowed that to happen because the cinema in the 70s was a bit more open. They could get away with the fact that he was going for a more sort of adult audience in terms of box office and stuff. I think at that point he could do pretty much what he wanted in terms of the story, because people would go and see a Hitchcock film and they would realise from the sort of pre-publicity of it that it is a murder film. It is a lot more salacious. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of the publicity materials for this film. You know how obviously in the first scene of the film you see the body floating on the murky brown water, but in the wee film that Hitchcock actually made for it, in the same way he did for a lot of them, it's him or a body made up to look like him floating in the water. So it's all that you get an idea then, this is kind of graphic, this is going to be a bit different as well. So yes, I really don't want to say I enjoyed it because that's going to haunt me, but no. It was very well done.
Yeah, I think there's no escape from it. It's very tight, so you can literally see the beads of sweat across his forehead. And as she's looking away to recite a prayer, to me, every time I watch it, I'm like, I need out of this room, because it feels like you're very, very close in on this that's happening. Interestingly, I read that they censored that scene to the extent where, obviously, when she's strangled and her tongue's hanging out, initially Hitchcock wanted to have a trail of drool coming off her tongue onto her breast, and they said, you can do everything else, but you can't have the drool, which is a very bizarre state of affairs. But I can see how apparently quite a lot of actors turned down parts in this movie. Michael Caine obviously being one of them. Helen Mirren, and Hitchcock's own daughter as well, interestingly appeared in Psycho but wouldn't appear in this because she said it was so disgusting. And I can see why people watching this movie, particularly for that scene, it does feel very, very grubby, but I think it's supposed to leave you feeling, I mean, it's not a pleasant thing that's happened. I think it's supposed to leave you feeling that kind of dirty way, almost as if you were in the room.
Yeah, I just find it interesting, the fact that maybe, as you both mentioned, the idea is a sign of the times, but Psycho got mixed reviews at best, and this was a rave, and you compare how both films are, you'd think it would be the other way about. You'd think this would be the one that would be kind of shocking critics in that it shocked everybody else. Like actors you mentioned there didn't want to be in it. It shocked us watching it, but critics were loving it. They couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah, and it is strange because I do feel like it's a forgotten Hitchcock. Like, I think if you think of Hitchcock movies, this would never even cross your mind to list. If you had to name 10, this would not, roll off the tip of your tongue. But I just think that I feel like I don't know because I don't know Hitchcock, but I feel like this is the type of movie he was sort of gearing up to make his whole career, and finally he had the freedom to do it, and he didn't want to do any more sort of Cary Grant in a nice suit or Doris Day sings a song. He wanted to do the kind of down and dirty stuff.
Yeah, definitely, you can see that. What about the comedic elements of this film? There is a fair bit of it. I'm thinking specifically in terms of the police inspector and his wife, and also the scene which is set in the back of the truck as well.
Yeah. For me, I'm going to speak of the police inspector a bit quickly, and then, like I mentioned at the beginning, I was speaking about this. It felt like there was different classes in the movie. Kind of kept, and like you've got Richard Blaney's character was that kind of bridge between the middle class that he clearly was and the working class that the world he clearly lived in. And you had that with kind of inspector and his wife as well, and she's trying to kind of make him these continental dinners and that, but he's just wanting to have a full English breakfast. I don't know if it really added anything to the movie. I don't know if it was deliberate kind of themes that were put in it. I don't know if it was just trying to kind of add some sort of light relief so it wasn't totally distressing the entire time. But I didn't mind it. I found the scenes quite humorous. I found it quite funny personally when she's serving him the dinner, and it looked terrific, and it's like the fish head soup and stuff, or the wee tiny sparrow and things. I did laugh, and it was funny. And maybe it was a nice weekend of welcome relief for all the horror going on. But the scene in the truck, I was wondering if that was meant to be comical.
Oh,
I wasn't sure.
I thought it was.
Because I was reading some reviews as well, and it was praised for its suspense.
I don't actually read it as comical. I read it as it's her revenge. So she's completely powerless in the act. And actually, the graphicness of the scene with Barbara Lee Hunt, we don't get with the scene with Anna Massey. And that's fine, because I don't want to see that twice. But so her sort of agency is taken away by the very fact that we don't even get to see what's happened to her. We don't even get to see how did she put up a fight? So she's completely powerless in that situation. And so by the time it gets to him scrambling around in the truck full of potatoes, her last act of revenge, or her only act of power, is to cling on to that tie pin and to cause problems for him in the back of that truck by, her corpses, like, her foot's in his face and whatever. To me, that's how I read that. It's her only act of power that she can possibly have over him. But maybe I'm reading too much into it because I'm getting two completely blank faces here. So
I can understand that. But the way I looked at that was kind of almost like a nod to a Carry-On film. It's almost like Carry-On Murder at that point. When you get the foot into the face, that kind of idea. And it is funny. I'm sure it must have elicited laughs at the cinema at the time because it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to actually see.
Yeah,
I'm enjoying that one. It was slapstick kind of element to it.
And that's as well, where the policeman's like, mate, you're spilling your load. So there is that kind of tongue-in-cheek element to it. And to go back to the chief inspector, I thought that was a sort of commentary on like aspirational social classes as well. Like, she's trying to have these fancy French dinners and he just wants meat. Like, he doesn't care. Like, he just wants meat, tatties, veg or whatever. But the whole thing of food is really prominent throughout it. So obviously Bob Rusk works on the fruit market. You see the grapes getting stamped on their foot. She ends up in the potato sack. And they all have surnames like Rusk, Salt and Barley. I'm not sure what the point of that is, but you can't stop noticing food the whole way throughout it. And I'm not sure what the commentary is there, but it is really prominent.
Could be something to do with consumption and things like that, and how everybody has different tastes. And obviously Bob Rusk's tastes go to strangulation and murder. Yes. Yeah, I liked the chief inspector's wife because even though she knew what she was doing when she was feeding him all these things, and the way she was presenting it and all that, and she would give him opportunities to put stuff back in the bowl or whatever, that kind of thing, and get rid of it. But she was actually a really good counterpoint for him, because he would sit and try and mull over certain aspects of the case, and she would say, but don't you think this, or don't why would he be doing that and all that? So it was almost as if she was prompting him to sort of think a bit deeper about what was actually going on and then push him in a certain direction. It's almost like a sage advice. There you go.
Yeah, and it was done in a different way, as opposed to the two of them just sitting having dinner, and then it's really kind of forced exposition, adding in the idea of the comical aspect to the continental dinners and stuff, and then she's kind of just throwing wee tidbits in. It wasn't as noticeable in a very forced way, which was quite nice.
I also loved how when she she was only making a margarita, but the two policemen are looking at each other like, and I was like, wow, she can't even make a margarita. Like, it's just this whole thing of like, she's just totally hopeless. But at the same time, as you say, John, she's wiser than, you know, the disgusting pig's trotters and jelly that she's putting out.
I also took that to the fact that they're like, margaritas, what the hell is that? Just give me a whiskey and brandy.
Yeah. That was probably too feminine a drink for hardened coppers back in the tough old London of the 70s.
I think one of the things I liked about the movie as well is that Richard Blaney's character isn't really that likeable.
He's a dick.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scene in the bar where he's asking for the triple brandy. He's like, ask for a triple brandy. This is a double brandy, and he's like berating the barman. And just
yeah. Sorry, we were just marvelling at another voice to your repertoire there.
Honestly, how are you not being snapped up in Hollywood?
I couldn't leave you to.
Yep.
I get offers all the time, but you know.
Yep. Is that Pixar on the phone? There,
it's the ghost of Hitchcock.
But the character of Blaney seems to he instills sort of loyalty though, because there are people around him who are very loyal to him, his girlfriend, and the other character that's introduced who was in the army with him as well, and hides him for a short while till there's another murder, which he couldn't have possibly done, but he's still getting blamed for it. But everybody, like you say, everybody else around him is suspicious of him. The wife of the guy that takes him, and she hates him right from her go. It's Billy Whitelaw, I think was the role. She hates him. She's got no time for him at all. She doesn't want him there, and it's a case of like, really just get out of my house, you know. What do you think of the idea that in order to get away, that they were going to go to France? You know, so far away, you know, let's escape to France to get away from it.
For me, that was a whole kind of class thing just kind of thrown back in, the fact that you want to escape, just go to France. Like, it was no big deal.
Yeah.
There's no big deal for people of that sort to just go to Paris. But I'm assuming Paris, you know, it was France though. It didn't seem a big deal. I know London and France aren't necessarily a million miles away from each other, but still, it just didn't seem like that big a deal for them just to cross the channel and hide out in a city with its own kind of mystique about it, and especially back then probably did look more kind of a higher market. France, especially Paris, has definitely got that kind of allure about it, that mystique. Yeah,
it was further away at that time because we didn't have the Channel Tunnel, so it was more difficult to get there. And like you say, it was a class thing. Yeah, absolutely. So, what about the scene, the camera work in the scene just before the murder of Blaney's wife? What did you think of that? The way that he gets blamed for it, and it's the camera that does all the work. He goes around the corner and everything, and then it goes up, and then the camera retreats down back into the street. And all that's just amazing, really good.
There's some brilliant camera shots in this, and it's those kind of classic tracking Hitchcock shots.
Yeah,
to really just kind of add the tension and set the scene.
Yeah, it's something you don't see a lot. It's something that we've seen quite a lot as we've been watching these films. He has certain style to the way, and the camera moves in unusual directions as well. It's not always the same. We got a shot in Psycho, for instance, where the camera moves up the stairs in the house and then goes above them. So and it's a way of not showing Norman's mother at all. You don't see Norman's mother's face, but you get quite a lot of that here as well, the way that it's used. And it's used, again, it's in a slightly sort of voyeuristic way, but it's also telling the story. It's show don't tell, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. It just it gives a wee moment to...
That's what you go. It's the same, probably the same, by the way.
All I was going to say is it just gives the film a wee moment to breathe as well, because sometimes like you are sort of anticipating this build up and then the camera maybe just moves a wee bit, or it either takes you away from the action or just sort of positions you slightly, because basically Hitchcock's only ever going to show you what he wants you to see. So you're right, it's about, concealing a face or making you look at someone come out of an office. So it's just about positioning you exactly, he's got you where he wants you, that sort of thing.
Yeah, all we've got to kind of mention there was you don't see enough tracking shots in films these days. And for example, I was watching, you really notice it in these movies because older films are still shot differently and cameras were totally different. And set up, for example, I was watching, I'm thinking of ending things last night. As I seen it at a dinner table where the camera tracks one way, then tracks the other. And even that just looked totally alien because films are all cut. And sometimes I do find older films harder to watch because my brain has been so used to a certain way of movie that when you see a shot just lingering and sitting there, the camera moving a way I'm not used to seeing, it's not jarring in a bad way. But it does make me think about it.
Yeah,
it will take about the film slightly because I'll be thinking about the camera shot. But that's not a bad thing because that's how films were made.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's used for for example, when Rusk takes Anna Massey up the stairs and you're in front of them, so they're coming up the stairs towards you, and then all of a sudden the camera backtracks right back down the stairs and you're like, wait a minute, no, don't go in that room, and you're literally it's almost like you're trying to get back up the stairs to sort of warn her. And I think it's used in a way, as you say, it would have been cut, and it's like that he just allowed the sort of scenes to sort of breathe, as I say, breathe in and out, or just take you into the action or take you out of it, and again, you only ever get to see what he wants you to see. And I just think it's so well done and so cleverly used, and it's just, and yeah, you're right, I have been noticing a lot more shots of stairways ever since we started watching Hitchcock movies, but it's there and it's always used really well, I think.
And that's the particular you're talking about, Mary, when it goes back onto the street and everybody just kind of go about their daily life, totally unaware this brutal murder's happening right next to them, and that is really unnerving. How he does it is great.
That goes back to what we were talking about with Psycho and bathrooms, that you're not safe in your own home, and something can happen to you, and outside everything else is going on just as normal, and nobody really knows what's happening at all. Yeah,
it's really well done. I think it's I actually find not more unnerving because obviously the whole rape scene is really just makes your heart rattle in your chest, but that scene, you're kind of, I do feel like you watch it and you're like, wait, what? And it literally just takes you out of it. And it's so quick in comparison to the length of the scene between, Barbara Lee Hunt and his character. So I think that it's almost like, this is going to sound really terrible, it's almost like he's sort of trying to not tease you into wanting to see it, but it's just, it's so the polar opposite of what you've seen before, and it's just over so quickly that you're just kind of like, oh my God, another murder's going to happen, and it does kind of leave you a wee bit rattled, but it's firmly in his control. And maybe that was a censorship thing. Maybe he couldn't show too. I don't know. But I just think it does kind of leave you wanting a wee bit more information, which is really terrible to say that out loud.
No, and I think it's interesting you mentioned the censorship idea in that as well, and what it could get away with. And you compare it to Psycho with getting away with a lot less. And even with what you do see, that movie was still subject to quite a lot of cuts, especially with different censorship boards. I think Ireland was the most famous one, and it was like tens of feet of the film were cut from it. And sometimes I think restrictions in the filmmaker can bring the best out in them. Like Jaws, for example, where we can't show you the shark that doesn't work, and it adds to the movie. So they have to be creative with it. And then all of a sudden the score represents the shark. And we mentioned Reservoir Dogs as well. He shows that scene with the ear getting cut off. That's getting cut for the movie, or it's getting a ridiculously high rating. So don't show it, and it adds to it. So yeah, sometimes what you don't see, sometimes that restriction can help you, because if they just want to do what they want to do, it might go too far.
Oh, and let's be honest, Hitchcock was like a raving misogynist who had a lot of mummy issues himself, and a lot of religious issues that sort of stunted his sexuality as well. So part of me just kind of look at this and go, oh, is this the movie you want to make? And, would you have gone much further if you were allowed? But yeah, I think in a way, maybe the censors did him a favour.
Can you imagine Hitchcock's DMs?
Worse than that toothpaste brand, yeah.
So how quickly did you figure out that the tie-pin was going to be a pivotal item within the film? I kind of figured out as soon as I saw it, because everything else in the opening scenes, as I said at the the top of this discussion was grimy and dirty and very unpleasant, and then you've got Bob, and he's wearing this bright gold tie pin, and you're kind of thinking, that's going to come back later. That's going to be a major point in this film somewhere. And I know that's just because we've watched so many films in our time. You can spot the plot devices almost right away, and it does kind of ruin things a wee bit. But when did you realise that it was going to be so important to the story?
I didn't even really click on it, to be fair. It's not something I was drawn towards when I was watching it. I didn't really think.
All right.
I think there's a close up of it when he's on his stall and he kind of like pats his lapel or something, and then you kind of go,
yeah,
big shiny,
Even after the fact, watching the film, I still didn't even really kind of think about it. But you mentioned that it is really prominent. It's a really prominent accessory.
It seems kind of strange, doesn't it, that somebody who uses ties to kill someone would put himself in that position of having a tie pin that he might lose at some point.
How many ties does this guy go through? You know, it's
people at Tyrac be like, sir, or I don't know, they'd be like, Cor, Governor, you were in here last week buying 6 ties.
Oh, you've got a challenger now, Thomas.
No,
Point over Artist of the Year.
No, because all of my accents are just me in a Scottish accent saying things phonetically. There's never any skill to it.
That's okay, Sean Connery.
Well, he famously said, if you can't do it, don't. It would be a distraction, and I feel like my vocal talents would be a distraction on this podcast, but I'm just kidding. What I love about the tie-pin scene, super quickly, is see when he goes back to the potatoes and he's in the truck, and he's like, it's the first time you kind of see him like grimy, because he's like quite well polished and he does have the dazzling tie pin. And what I love about it is, you know, her hands are around it like, you know, fuck you, you're not getting this back. And he really lets go, he really lets rip. He's like, you're a bitch, this is, you know, and he's calling her for everything. And it's just like, wow, even that she, you know, the fact that she's clutching onto the tie pin that you helped murder her with, this is her fault. And I feel like that's when you get to see the sort of real character, because he is well polished and he's very congenial, and he almost sort of skips about, and he's got a plum in his hand, and he is that kind of like walking like a proper cockney, as it were. And that's the only time you see him really kind of dishevelled and dirty, and you know, he's obviously lost a little bit of like the one tiny bit of glamour that he has on his brown suit. And I kind of love that contrast with him for the rest of the film. But yeah, I mean, John, yeah, you're right. The minute you see it, and it does kind of stand out again against the sort of brown suit or whatever he's wearing, you're just like, that tie pin, and it's the necktie strangler. Apart from Simmy, who was just too busy like practicing his accents.
Yeah, he was probably practicing his Mexican accents at that point.
I was taking notes from the movie, but not for the podcast.
What do you guys think? Oh, sorry, on you go.
There you go.
No, all I was going to ask is, the only thing that bothers me about this film is, in fact, not the only thing, because obviously there's lots of things. The only thing that bothers me about this film, the main thing, is the ending. I find the ending really, really like ambiguous and sort of not tied up, and not kind of like, I don't feel like anything's really resolved. Like, he sort of walks in and tries to hit what he thinks is Rusk under the covers, and then the policeman walks in, sees him, you know, beating up a body on the bed. There's blood everywhere, and he just goes, shh, and waits for Rusk to come back in with a big suitcase. Now, Rusk could easily just go, oh my God, he was homeless, he's broken into my house and he's murdered someone. I was just coming up the stairs because I was going on holiday. Like, it's so, like, nothing is tied up. And even though you know that Rusk is the guilty party, for me it's so frustrating, because I don't feel like you see justice.
You see, I just took it as being the opposite, the idea that kind of like, the cop knows at this stage, because at first when the cop walks in, I can imagine going, for fuck's sake, mate, I'm trying my best to give you the benefit of the doubt here. And you just keep giving me more evidence. But then when Rusk walks in, he's like, excuse me, Mr. Rusk, where is your tie? You know, dun, dun, dun. But it ends really abruptly.
And then just like roll credits.
But it goes back to that kind of carry-on style that John was mentioning, where he's looking this massive trunk with clearly a body in it. And there's caught red-handed, and there's like he's quite comically caught in the sense he's well walking in saying, "Yeah, it was me." He's well handing himself in at that point.
that was done very deliberately. There was a version of that where he gets caught and he basically just goes, "Oh, yeah, right, I'm caught, fair enough." And Hitchcock said, "No, you don't do that. You don't drop your shoulders. You don't show any emotion. You just accept it. You just drop the trunk, nothing else." Because if you look at Barry Foster there, he shows very little emotion. It's almost like he's just going, "I've had enough, Gov. I'm done. I've tried to cover up my tracks as much as possible. I can't do any more." And he's just, yep. It's probably a weight off his mind, to be perfectly honest. So that's the way that they kind of approached it. That it was very ambiguous and it just ended because, why would he show remorse? He wasn't remorseful at any point during the film. And if you think about it, the very last scene, he was trying to cover up the latest one. And it was getting more and more out of hand, if you like, because it was the murders were happening all over the place within sort of the borough that they stayed in, but they were getting closer and closer to home. The last two were in his flat, which he obviously didn't. The first one he obviously could get away with because he had time in order to cover it up and get rid of the body, and even that caused problems when he was actually getting rid of the body. And obviously we talked about the tie pin and everything, but this one was very quick, and therefore he was struggling. It wasn't organised in any way, so it was almost like he was at the end of his tether. He just couldn't take anymore.
They do say that about serial killers, don't they? They get sloppier the more they go on.
It's a discipline thing. They get more. It's well documented that the frequency increases because they don't get the same thrill from it that they used to. There's not the same satisfaction, so therefore they have to do it more often to try and get that buzz or whatever. And I'm obviously not speaking from a position of total understanding of this. This is all anecdotal from my conversations in the dark web, obviously.
The ending it does bother me though. I mean, I get like he is getting sort of, as you say, like sloppier, and he's got like the big like fuck off trunk going up the stairs with it and stuff like that. But the ending, it kind of annoys me because I'm just like, he could. I mean, he's charming. He's a charming character. He could charm his way out of this, and it literally is like the credits just kind of like woof up the screen, and it's really fast. And it does kind of frustrate me because there's no justice in it. I mean, Blaney's not a particularly nice character, as you've said, Simi, anyway, so it's not like you go through the film feeling great sympathy for him, but he has obviously gone to prison for something that he's not done. But I just feel like the ending, I just feel like Russ could talk his way out of it. There's no closure for me.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I think I can take the interpretation of what John was saying as well, that at that point he's not even going to try. He's like, I'm caught. I know maybe there's a part of him as well annoyed that he wasn't getting the credit.
That's
Those
true,
were my murders. Yeah, no, I get that.
It's interesting that happened with Peter Sutcliffe in a way, because somebody else was getting the credit for the murders, because there was a prank phone calls where people thought it was actually the Yorkshire Ripper calling up the police and the radio stations and stuff, but it was some just crank phone caller. I think it was the Tayside area. No, so say Teesside. And I think it was kind of like a kind of Geordie style accent. So the cops actually believed that was the area they should be looking in for this killer. Threw them off course because of this crank call. I never found out who the person was either.
They didn't.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all so much more educated nowadays, aren't we? Sorry, Mary, who were you saying?
No, I know it's creepy, and I know that the ending does bother me, but I do really love this movie. I think it's like Hitchcock on drugs. I think there's so much of it that's a classic Hitchcock movie, and there's so much of it that's just his own personal issues with women and that sort of thing. But I really like it, and I think I almost feel like it's kind of a shame that it maybe doesn't get talked about as much, because like you always, Hitchcock's a women hater, Psycho, and that's like, it's always kind of given straight away as the example. It's like, if you want to see his really dirty secrets, you should go and watch Frenzy. I think it's much worse.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is Hitchcock on cocaine, and nobody's telling him what he can't do to an extent anyway. And in this stage, this is almost like this is a film he wants to make. That sounds really dark, but yeah, it's like near the end of his career as well. He's one more film after this. He's just balls to the wall. He can get away with.
Yeah, and I just wonder now, like if I felt like, I mean, obviously there have been films like Irreversible and stuff like that where there have been quite sustained, and The Nightingale, obviously, where there's been really kind of graphic rape scenes and stuff like that now. But you do wonder if if a film like this would get made now, and if actors would want to be involved, because obviously quite high profile actors turned this one down, and that was back in what you would call a sort of fairly liberal, sexually liberal, 70s or whatever. And you do wonder if a type of film like that has a place in contemporary cinema, and would people want to be involved with something that's seen as quite gratuitous? Because it's not artsy, it's not like Irreversible where it's got that beautiful non-linear construct, and or like to a certain extent The Nightingale, where it's got a narrative about indigenous peoples and women's rights and stuff like that. It's just almost like not a dirty picture, but you know what I mean? It's just this guy hates women. No, and so there's no kind of there's no sort of morality to it, and you just wonder if it would have if somebody would want to get involved in something like that now.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding really kind of pretentious, like I say, I felt some cracking shots in this movie, but there's maybe less artistic merit in it.
Yeah.
Compared to his other films, compared to Psycho, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It feels more, I wouldn't say as far as a grindhouse movie, but it's probably not far away from it.
True, yeah. It would be difficult to get something like this made now. It really would. It wouldn't be tackled in the same way. Just, I think you're right. I couldn't see it really happening now in the way that it's been presented back in 1972.
Yeah, and it all just kind of comes back to that barmaid who gets like really excited about the fact that these women potentially get raped, and that's what always kind of sticks in my head.
Yeah, and there's that scene at the pub when she talks about getting fingered. I'm like, did I hear that right? I feel like though that there is a lot, like as I say, the spill your load thing. I feel like there's lots of sexual jokes in that, and I think that's quite deliberate. I don't think you've misheard that or misinterpreted that. I think that's quite a deliberate, like, did he just say that? And then you're like, oh yeah, he did, and that kind of sets the tone for the movie.
Yep, totally.
Well, it's a very interesting film in the way that it is of its time, but at the same time, it kind of transcends it in terms of what British cinema was in the early 70s. It is very grimy and gritty and dirty, as mentioned, but I liked it. I'd never seen it before. I'd never heard of it until I saw this box set. For me, it's a lesser known Hitchcock film, but like I said at the start of this, it's very critically acclaimed. I saw it as being one of his a return to form, so to speak. But yeah, I would recommend this. John?
Totally, yes. As I said, I went into it with sort of negative feelings about it from the first 10-15 minutes and what I'd read about it. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a very, very good Hitchcock film, and yeah, I would recommend it for anybody, especially a nipple guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you've got a nipple.
Yeah.
This film does not disappoint.
Yep. Yeah, I this is this like fifth or sixth watch for me. I really love this movie. It's Hitchcock on drugs. It's dirty, it's grimy, it's grubby, and I kind of love it for that reason.
Interesting. I'm trying to kind of, it's like Psycho's kind of like Hitchcock meeting the family, and then this is Hitchcock in the sheets.
Psycho in the streets, frenzy in the sheets.
There we go. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Well, that concludes another Hitchcock special by us. If you would like to get in contact and discuss Psycho, Frenzy, any other films we may have spoiled, any potential serial killers you may follow on Twitter, or know from some of your favourite David Fincher films, please let us know on the social media at Moviescramble on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And you can email us at an email address that I have once again forgot.
Podcast at moviescramble.co.uk.
Whoop, whoop.
There we go. Please get in touch.
And if you are a kinky cannibal, you can slide into our Instagram DMs as well.
Yeah, slide into our DMs and let us know if you like eating the still beating heart of swans. And I must add, if people do not understand the context of that, do not take it out on me. Do your research, people. We've left you the clues. We've left you the hints. It's up to you to now do the work. And for that, I will say goodbye until the next one. Actually, no. What are we doing next, Mary?
Rope and Strangers in a Train.
Excellent. Before we go on to that, have you both of you seen both these films?
Yes.
Yes. I haven't seen Strangers in a Train.
The theme is cocky bastards.
Interesting. I kind of like that. I've seen Rope. I watched Rope last year, but yeah, look forward to it. So until next time, thanks everybody for tuning in, for downloading, for streaming it, listening, wherever you listen to your podcasts, whether it be iTunes, on YouTube, or any Android applications such as Castbox or Pocket Cast. Thank you for continuing to support us during these hard times, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.